Everybody. A special thank you to Laura Lana. You're doing great back there. And it should be said, another special thank you to Mrs. Conway, who has shown years worth of patience that most of us parents would not have had. So you are all doing great back there. Well, on days that I work the late shift, Annie and I will often spend the morning sitting in the living room, drinking coffee, and talking about the state of the family. We discuss our goals, our struggles, and our relationships with those close to us, including interactions and observations. That's a polite way of saying we talk about people. One day Annie said, "I wonder what other people would say about us." And that got me thinking. My immediate reaction was to say that I didn't much care, as I couldn't please everyone, nor could I help what someone thought about me. But the more I thought about it, the more I questioned the validity of that answer. The truth of the matter is, if we're going to be ambassadors for Christ, a light on the hill, we need to care about how other people perceive us. I was actually talking with Mr. Bill Conway about that earlier today, and he said, it's a question that I've asked myself all the time. And I said, well, let's learn together. So, what do you think of Bill Conway? That's not fair. I'll throw myself in there. What's the first thing you think of when you think of Glenn Radebaugh? And my fear is some of you would start with... So think about yourselves. What do others think of when they think of you? What is the first thing that comes to mind when someone is asked to describe you? Let's start in Proverbs 22. We're only going to read one verse in Proverbs 22, and it's the first one. Proverbs 22:1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver or gold. A good name here is from Strong's H8064. It implies honor, authority, and character. So let's break down those three for a moment. Honor, high respect, great esteem, adherence to what is right or to a conventional standard of conduct. High respect, great esteem, adherence to what is right or to a conventional standard of conduct. Authority, the confidence resulting from personal expertise, a person with extensive or specialized knowledge about something, an expert. So we have a person that is held in great esteem for adhering to conventional standard of conduct because they are an expert in that field. They have extensive specialized knowledge about something. And character, the mental or moral qualities distinctive to an individual. The mental or moral qualities distinctive to an individual. So to put together the first part of verse 1, we can feel pressured to be known for physical treasures and accomplishments. We should instead prioritize being held in high regard for our knowledge of and adherence to God's standards for conduct. Those standards, love of God, love of His law, and love of our neighbor, should be our defining characteristics when people think of us. Now go to the second part of that, loving favor. Remember, loving favor, better than silver, gold and silver. Silver and gold, if we're going to get in the right order. That is H2580. It means graciousness, kindness. The implication is being courteous, kind, and pleasant. So in other words, we aren't seeking our good name in a haughty or self-serving way. We are known for humbly and kindly and pleasantly following God's laws and having God's laws be the defining characteristic of what we are as a person. And we are to be experts on it, and we are to have a character along with that is not haughty. Why is this important? Colossians 4 tells us. This, if I were to introduce more of my own personal thoughts, I think that this could be a struggle that sometimes we have historically in the church dealt with. And I think that sometimes at some areas that some other Christian churches might lean toward doing a better job of at times. Colossians 4, 2 through 6. Continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Meanwhile, praying also for us that God would open to us a door for the word to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in chains, that I make it manifest as I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward those who are on the outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be filled with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Now, I did not mean that I don't think that we have our speech seasoned with grace, but sometimes we completely remove ourselves and we don't have speech at all. Sometimes we have the mindset that we are called to be away from the world, that we are called out of the world, and we completely remove our interactions from the world. And that's not doing exactly what we're called to do here. We're called to be lights. We're called to be examples. We are called to have a character that is giving speech seasoned with grace and salt, that we know how to answer each person that is on the outside. And again, this goes back to the concept that we are representing our Father's family name and the kingdom that our elder brother will be ruling over. We are representing that. That does not mean that we are hid away, that we are removed from it. A good litmus test would be to ask yourself what someone thinks about the Church of God based on what they think of you. Are you a beacon of light or a stumbling block to those people in the community? Or are you nothing at all? That would be a third option, I guess. You can be a stumbling block. You can have people who are going to say, I don't really want to follow God's way because I've seen how Glenn acts when he's out there. And if that's how people are in the church, I don't want to be a part of it. You could have people that say, wow, you know what? I recognize what's going on, that there's something different. Or they might say, didn't even know that Glenn was a part of a church. Now again, it's okay to stand out. And doing the right thing often creates notice. Just make sure that you stand out for good reasons. I thought of Philippians 2:14 and 15, which says, do all things without complaining or disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. I'm going to tell you, this is something that I struggle with because I have a sarcastic and dry personality. And as, I guess, a defense mechanism, sometimes I have the tendency to lean toward being sarcastic. And when you're sarcastic, you have negative comments that come out for the sake of being funny. But it doesn't always put me in a positive light in people's eyes. I'm not always spreading positivity and spreading a positive light to people in those moments. So doing things without complaining or disputing is something that I can certainly learn to do so that I can shine as a light in the world. Now here's where things get a little bit complicated, because we've all known people that can act a certain way out in the public, and when they get back home, when the doors close, they're a different person. And sometimes it's easy to fool people, which is why we have to ask a deeper question here. We've asked what people think of us when they think of you. Add your name here. Secondarily, what does God think of when he thinks of you? Because you can't hide from God. You can't hide your heart from God. You can hide it from people, but not from God. Let's look at 1 Samuel 16. We're going to see this in kind of a positive light, I guess, depending on what person you're following. 1 Samuel 16, this is at the point that David is going to be picked to be king of Israel, and specifically at the point that Saul isn't going to be, and Samuel was a little confused. Samuel was going to be using a different set of standards than God was for picking the king. It starts in verse 1. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. So Samuel goes out. He meets with Jesse. In verse 6, so it was that they came, that he, Samuel, looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. So Samuel saw some characteristics that he liked in Eliab. He could have been strong. He could have had the physical appearance. He could have maybe greeted Samuel in the right way that Samuel thought, this looks like a guy that God would want to be king. Verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Now here we do get a little more context that God was talking about Samuel seeing outward appearance. But outward appearance, beyond this passage, can be viewed in a lot of different ways. It can be your physical stature. It could be the words that you're saying, the look on your face, the attitude that you have, the energy that you carry about you. Let's look at Luke 16. So we've established that God looks at the heart in a way that man isn't necessarily capable of doing. Let's look at Luke 16, 14 to 15. This is definitely not as positive. Luke 16, 14. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him, Christ. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. The Pharisees were justified before men, but God knew their hearts. Elsewhere, Jesus likens the scribes and Pharisees to whitewashed tombs, appearing clean on the outside, but full of death and decay on the inside. It's possible for us to have the outward appearance of a person who has godly character. It's possible for us to pass the first step of this message, that when they think of your name, they think of a positive person, while having a heart that is not held to those same standards. It's why Jesus called the scribes and Pharisees hypocrites so many times. It stands as a warning to us that if our appearance of character and kindness is fake, the facade will eventually wear away, and our true heart will be exposed. We can tie this together in Luke 6, so turn back a couple pages. Luke 6, verses 43 to 45. For a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its own fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. And that treasure goes back to the first verse that we went through, Proverbs 22:1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver or gold. If that is the treasure you are seeking in your heart, then the fruit will bear on the outside. While it may be true that we cannot fully control what others think of us or how we're seen, we can control our hearts. A truly good name, based on honor, authority, and character, begins with our heart. When developed correctly, the good name we seek is formed directly from the godly fundamentals established within. As we interact with those around us, let's be mindful of how we are perceived, so that when those people are having their morning coffee and our name comes up, they can see that we are good people, kind, knowledgeable, and that we do well to represent our Father.